Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about general information for the cell cycle. So let's not waste any of your time, let's get right to it. Now in this series of video lectures we're going to be breaking down everything about cell reproduction, cell division, including each of the phases, each of the stages, and all those things. There's a bunch of things that control cell division. The steps for cell division are pretty important, but you could argue the fact that the things that regulate cell division are even more important because without those, all sorts of bad things can happen, including you'll get a good look at cancer during this series. Not that we'll spend a lot of time on cancer, but along the way, as we're talking about things, and it's the final video, we'll see that there are plenty of things in place to make sure that everything happens as it should. And when those things break down, that's when cancer cells occur. And one of the things that you may not really have an idea of exactly what cancer cells are, they're not autonomous creatures in themselves. They are just cells out of control. And so, but we'll talk some about that. But before we move on and talk more about cell division, let's set up some things about cells in general. If you know anything about, if you've had a biology class, you know the cell theory. Hopefully you recall that, but a lot of this, what's on the screen, is about the cell theory. It's the basic unit of life. The cell is, the hierarchy of cells. Cells, and then a bunch of cells make a tissue. Tissue makes organ make organ systems, and so on and so on. All living things are made out of cells. That is the building block for those. And cells come from pre-existing cells. And you may say, well, yeah, we know that. Duh. Any fifth grade, sixth grade life science students understands that. But that's not nearly as easy a concept as you might imagine. If you flip back in time, let's see, this is 2021. So if you'll go back 500 years, no, 400 years, to scientists that were really beginning to understand how things work, even amongst all the social pressures to conform to the thought process of the day. But the idea of scientists trying to learn about, they weren't necessarily trying to learn about cells because they were just discovering their existence, but to do so without good quality equipment. Nowadays you can Google search cells and get all kinds of great microscopic views of it, electronically especially, but they were just learning how to build a microscope. So the fact that they were learning that stuff without any knowledge base of it, and the fact that they didn't have the equipment necessary, so the idea of cells coming from cells, we are fully established on that, and could watch a video on that if we chose to. But prior to the proper equipment and any knowledge base, I mean, that wasn't the prevailing thought at the time. But cell division in prokaryotic cells, we're going to take a look at that. Getting that binary fission, we're going to talk about what that process is. And of course, everything about the eukaryotic cells we will certainly touch upon. Now, the process of cell division, it's one of the main reasons. Well, it's one of the many reasons why these courses always start with a fundamental chemistry look, because everything is chemical reactions, chemical signals, which incorporate a lot of the processes that cells go through. And the start of cell divisions is no different than that. The idea, when it's time, the cell gets some kind of a signal, whether that comes through neurons, which are chemical processes, whether that comes through a hormone emitting chemical processes to pass along messages. But when it does get that signal, then the cell will go through the processes and end up dividing into two daughter cells. But we'll go through all those steps. Now, if it's sexual reproduction through a cellular nature, that means that there are two partners involved, and that's the idea of an offspring, whether it's a mammal, whether it's a plant, insect, whatever. But if it's asexual, then that means only one parent is involved, and bacteria would be a prime example of that, where just one cell just goes through a process and divides into two, and of course that would be a complete identical process. Now, one of the things that we're going to touch upon on this slide for certain, and there are others as well, is that process of separating and what speciality or what special processes are in place. And I've got here on the screen a list of 8 things, and you'll write those down, I'm sure. And excuse me, the writing on the diagram is pretty small, but it's the pictures that you really want to pay attention to. When prokaryotic cells go through binary fission, the DNA stuff done with the DNA, and then you get that 2 separate DNA strands into the cell, but then it goes through a special process. The PTSZ ring is what that's called. It's the 3rd picture down there. This little ring of proteins begins to form, and then that ring kind of flattens out and begins and will eventually be the walls of the newly formed cells. So if you got a circle, if you can just imagine that circle, then it flattens out into a straight line, but it's got 2 halves. If you cut it perfectly at the top and bottom, you'd get 2 lines, and that's what happens. The circle separates, and then those 2 lines become the walls of the new cells to go with each of them. But that process is when it flattens out and starts to form into those walls. That's called a septum, and that's certainly a word that you want to be sure you capture and understand what's going on there. But the cell will go through the processes, and when it comes time to divide, that PTSZ ring will appear, and then will flatten out, and then will separate, and then when the cells divide, that becomes the member of the 4th wall, the one to the left on the inside and right on the inside, for that separation. Well, that's our video over general information for cell division. When we come back next time, we're going to be looking at chromosomes and their role in cell division. We'll see you then.